Okay, everybody, we're gonna get started. Sorry about the time mixed up, okay, but we compromise. We're gonna start on time. As I had explained in the email to the captains, this is a two-part class. You don't have to attend. The second part is optional. First part is mainly the lecture portion. We're gonna talk about the reports, the codes that requires it, and the loopholes. Because there's a big old loophole in the fire escape there. Even though everybody calls the fire department and say, I have a problem with my fire escape, we don't really have jurisdiction over it, housing does, okay? Second portion would have been a field trip, but if you look at San Francisco, it's impossible, you know? It'll take us all day just to drive around. But you have videos of the inspections.
Yeah, video of inspection.
So for those of you, especially in complaints, you know, that might have to do the inspection, and we're not gonna be a structural engineer type instructors. You should be able to look at something obvious and know there might be a problem, okay? So we'll have a sign-in sheet going around, okay? Make sure you sign in for part one. If you're staying for part two, sign for part two, and I will talk to the instructors. I think we can get credit from the state, right?
So you're gonna get a 1 hour lunch, and then, you know, then after that, come back for the second part. We'll hold it indoors. We've got plenty of videos, so you don't have to go out there and get wet, but it's more hands-on, we'll touch a lot of the rusty steel, and that was the intent, and we were supposed to go down to the tower, and maybe we'll do that another time, but we inspect the fire towers also to make sure that they're safe for the training, and we'll go over all that.
Yeah, okay.
But I also wanted to mention, you mentioned that the 1104 is gonna be, if unchallenged, it's gonna be hitting the books January 1, 2020.
Yeah, so right now, most likely it's gonna pass, because you know how whenever we make an amendment to the fire code, we have to have everybody look at it for 30 days, post it to make sure nobody protests before it passes. So there's two important changes coming for the fire code. Before it was just, when you look in the amended fire code, the San Francisco fire code, it just say, don't obstruct the fire escape. Now it's gonna say the fire escape cannot be through a locked room, a tenant room. So what we're finding out with a lot of the older building is, I guess, when people want more living units, they just built a door in front of a nice open space that is access to the fire escape. Next thing you know, the tenant is living behind there and it's locked. I mean, so we're gonna address that. And the other one, we're gonna amend chapter 11. So that was chapter 10. Chapter 11, 1104, section 1104. We're gonna actually put a section in there that says, we want to see the 5-year inspection report. That's that building department housing affidavit 604, okay? So those are the big changes coming that we actually write violations for now, okay?
You're at the 1104, that's great, because that's what's gonna put it in your court now. And the beauty about that is that the 1104 is gonna mandate the 5-year on every structure that has a second means of egress outside. So there's a lot, it's wide open. Question?
Is that San Francisco Fire Code 1104 or the California Fire Code?
It's the California, it's being adopted by San Francisco.
Yeah, so
1104.16.
California Fire Code 1104, you know how they go point whatever,
Yeah,
we're gonna add
16.
one more point to it, okay?
Right.
So if you go to point 16, it ends, is what happened, go to point 16, which is in our amended code. Okay?
Right.
And then the other part about not going through locked doors, is that the?
That's in chapter 10,
That's it.
yeah, that's in chapter, let's see, here, I'll give you guys the exact section. Locked door is 1013.2.32.
Repeat it again,
1031, 1031.2.32. And the 5-year is 1103.7.10. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry, I quoted you the wrong one, Bill, sorry. It's 1104.16.5. 1104.16.5. Sorry, I didn't have my glasses.
And by the way, you may not be ordering a 5-year, you may be asking for a copy of the certificate, that's all it is. So you don't have to determine whether or not the fire escape is in good order or not, you're just saying, I need a copy of the 5-year, and it's very strict. The fire escapes must be certified by a design professional or others acceptable to the building official. So right now, these 5 years are all gonna be by design professionals, architects, engineers, or specialty companies that have activity in the fire escape realm only, or they have architects and engineers in their company that do the fire escapes. So that's gonna take it away from some of the other pieces. But we're gonna cover all that just to talk about the 1 year, who has licenses, who doesn't. So we're gonna go over all that right now with you. But the key is, all these pieces are gonna be talked about today. And let's just take a quick little history bump first, so you can understand why there's an issue. In 1915,
Excuse me, Francisco,
Yeah.
so, I'm gonna leave you to introduce your organization and you, okay?
perfect, so I'm the National Firescape Association. The reason why, you know, we teach this class nationwide, and I've been teaching it for over 15 years, is because in 1915, they basically said no more firescapes in the US, okay? And so that's why right now, every building you see being built after that started having 2 staircases inside and an elevator. But the existing buildings that already had structures, an interior stair plus a firescape on the outside, they said, well, we'll just maintain those until those all get torn down. Sounds pretty simple, right? And so that's why you can't build new firescapes on new construction. But you can build new firescapes on existing construction. So if you have a mansion that somebody used to live, you know, with 16 rooms and somebody turns into 4 condos, and there's a main stairway in there, can you put a firescape on that? The answer is yes. Once you've exhausted all possibilities of putting in another staircase somewhere inside that building, the firescape can be built on the outside. So 100 years ago, they said, let's stop building firescapes because they're outside, nobody's watching this stuff. And then all of a sudden, for 100 years, they thought a lot of these buildings would be down on the ground, but then there was an invention through both world wars and I don't know if everybody's heard of duct tape, paper clips, bubble gum, and a lot of these buildings are being held, they were not supposed to be here 100 years later. So that's how long they have not been maintaining firescapes with a 5-year inspection. So all of California, and we inspect all of California, all of the US, the first time that a 5-year rule hit the books was in 2012. I'm gonna cover that. So every firescape in the US, Chicago, New York, California, there was no 5-year mandate to inspect your firescape. There was a requirement by the owner to maintain it at all times. Only a few cities had a 5-year rule implemented of some kind, because somebody says, well, we're not gonna wait for the national law to come along, we're gonna do it. San Francisco is one of them, because a lot of code is written in blood, right? So as soon as there's some blood on the ground, all of a sudden ordinances show up, codes show up. Massachusetts had the same thing in '73, a very famous picture that, if you look on the back of your book, it took that to change our code, and so the Mass code was amended to have a 5-year rule. And it too will start, you know, going away, because again, once the blood is dry, they kind of forget about it until the next big thing happens. So just imagine, for 100 years, every California firescape was the only one in charge of keeping it up and maintained was the owner. So if it ain't broke, what's the finish? Don't fix it. So the only time firescapes in California got fixed is when there was a fire, there was a major construction on the property, you had a concerned architect who said, you know, while we're here putting $50 million into whatever, let's spend, you know, $50,000 on your firescape, and let's get that up to speed. Otherwise, it was all relying on the fire department, okay? So we're gonna go over a bunch of things. We're gonna try to be interactive, and the objective is so that you understand. If you understand how it went bad, then you can understand how we're gonna fix it, and you can't fix it. It took 100 years to screw this up. We can't fix it in 10 days, we can't fix it in 10 months. This on average will take, before it finally filters all the way out, 3 to 5 years before you guys get some good. And a lot of times you're gonna start in downtown, because that's where all the big high rises, the money is in the business side, and then it's gonna filter out to the residential. Otherwise, you're gonna have people with pitchforks and fire and, you know, showing up. So we have fire represented here, right? Fire prevention? Any building? And they were heavily invited, housing? Well, it's their code that we're gonna be talking about. So this is what happened for 100 years. So because of that, now you guys understand. Anybody here that's had a hose in their hand? You're all taught, right? During your training, in case of fire, don't use the fire escape. That's how bad it got. So it was under the control of the building department for 100 years. In 2012, we went finally to the 1104. The 1104 in 2012 was a national adoption. And you know how long it took states to adopt it into the state? And then it took depending on the size of your city, for the city to adopt the amended state version, well, it's 2019 for you guys right now. 8 years later, now it's finally hitting the books on fire, because who does it affect? Who does fire affect? The tenant and fireman. Do you ever see a building department guy on the ground holding a baby? No? How about a housing inspector on the ground holding a baby? So it kills tenants and it kills firemen. So you guys are all here, you're all represented, so I know you guys don't play very good volleyball with the building department or housing, but you're gonna basically know the whole code. And now it finally hit your code. If you go to IBC and you look under fire escape maintenance, guess what it says? It says IFC 1104. So after 100 years, they brought it back. But some states are pulling it back into IBC. They said they need another shot at it, because the first 100 years they weren't really focused on it. They wanted, because sometimes it's about the fees collected and such, okay? So let's take a look at the 604. This is the exact 604. So let's take it apart, because it's very important that you understand that the reason why it got taken apart is because you guys, the same way you rely on engineers and architects to do the smart thing, the right thing, what happens is sometimes the people who are not being watched, they get lower and lower in what they need to do. But let's just read it out. It says, and this is good that you even had a 1 year and a 5 year, because it helped. Okay? It says all building appendages must be inspected by a licensed general contractor. Why not a structural engineer or an architect? So that's a little bit backwards, or structural pest control licensee. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, but I've never heard of a structural pest control. And again, it has to do with a lot of wood, the moisture, rot, and so maybe a lot of the beams, maybe they have a special way to check the interior of a beam to see whether it's rotted from the inside out. But this was kind of poorly written or worded, but we can work around it. We have to get to know it, or a licensed professional architect and engineer at the very end. Okay? And it says, verifying that the exit system, what is an exit system? All exterior steel or wooden stairways. Would cement fall into there, even though it's not mentioned? All exterior steel or wooden stairways must be examined. That's an exit system. That's how you exit to a public way. All. It says right in the code. But nobody ever tore it apart, and nobody's enforcing it at housing. They want to take a paper and do what with it? Stick it in the file, and then pull it out whenever there's blood on the ground and say, hey, I got a paper here that says. So I took verifying that the exit system, I think the exit systems should only be inspected by engineers and architects or others that qualify to the building official, because that's exactly what the 1104 code says. Do you agree with me? Corridor. I think a GC can walk inside this and check the corridor. Do you need an architect to check the interior of a hallway going to the fire escape? So interior, should it still remain architects and engineers, or do you think a GC can handle that part? Right? But it says we're looking at the entire system, inside and outside. That's how this thing reads, right? Balcony. Berkeley is a perfect example. Who should inspect that? A general contractor or an architect engineer? Right? So I just put these reds in there as just to sort of say who I think the above people are qualified to inspect. The deck. Well, it depends on the size of the deck, right? Because decks are going to be inspected by architects and engineers, but sometimes some decks are really small. You think a general contractor can handle a very small deck? So let's put it to them. And then and any thereof, or any thereof, which is again back to all appendages, right? Structural pest. I don't know. I've never heard of such a structural pest control licensee. And it is in general safe condition, in adequate working order, and free from hazardous dry rot, fungus, deterioration, decay, or improper alteration. Wow, they're asking improper alteration. Who would know if something is improperly alterated? Would it be the general contractor or would it be the architect who knows all the building codes? The architect draws plans that contractors follow. So it's right here in the code. Property owner shall then provide proof of compliance with a section by submitting the affidavit form to the Inspection and Service Division every 5 years, the Housing Inspection Division. And they collected it. Did they verify it? Did they qualify? They needed to put where? In the file.
It's coming from what code book?
It's housing, right? 604?
Authority.
Housing Authority. So that's all you had here, because otherwise in the building and the fire, it says maintain your fire escape in relatively good order at all times. So that's the code, both fire and building, maintain your fire escape in good working order at all times, and housing had this 5 year. You see how this kind of like went off to the side? Housing thought that these people all were gonna do their job correctly, right? And did they? But they received a piece of paper, because you can buy this paper, from who? If I have an engineer tell me I have a piece of crap, can I buy the same paper from a general contractor and have him sign off on it? So can you buy paper in this? People have been buying paper, right? So let's take a look at the 908. The 908 is the 1 year. All safety devices or equipment, and I highlighted fire escapes, shall be kept clear, unobstructed, and readily accessible at all times, right? Upon inspection, the property owner, did you guys know that? The 1 years that you guys have been getting that you thought were 5 years, right, can be done by the owner. Do you trust the owners to inspect your fire escapes? But wait a second, let's back it up. If there's a proper 5 year done by a structural engineer, the 1 year is not a structural inspection, it's a verification that things are working. If a properly done, signed off, stamped structural report is sitting in the file, would you then allow a 1 year to be done by the property owner on some of these residential properties? If they sign, they take responsibility. So remember, this is property owners can sign, but they take on responsibility. But if there's a proper 5, what's the chances that within 5 years, a fire escape goes bad? 0, unless a tree fell on it, and it's 0. So would you feel more comfortable if it had a proper 5 year? Because these make sense if you have so property owner or other authorized agent. Now some of these, and there's not that many, there's only 4 companies out there that are doing inspection. We got Mazzy, which does a lot of fire protection equipment, plus fire escapes. We got Great Escapes, Escape Artists.
West Coast.
Yeah, well, West Coast is not licensed, so
Right. Talk about
but there, we'll talk about that situation, what happens when people are, using the system. But the key that's important right here is that the owner can inspect his own property. Now, if somebody owns a 5, 10, 15 story, you think the owner wants to inspect a 5, 10 story doing the 1 year? Or is he gonna use an authorized agent? Doesn't mention any licenses in here. So the 1 year inspections that have been done out there, did they carry any license requirement based on the 908 code? Because if the owner can sign off on it, can anybody start a 1 year fire escape company? And they have. Everybody that's been inspecting your fire escape has no license. But they can do 1 years. But then they got the fox in the hen house, they got a little greedy and they started doing 5 years, and guess who didn't catch it? Housing. But guess who would catch the heat and the fall? Fire. And the tenants. So you see how this went? This is a great idea, it just got handed to the wrong department to keep an eye on it. Because this should have stayed with who? Those it affects, and that is who? And every time we would get a call of somebody freaking out, they would call you guys first, they would call us second, looking for codes in the book, and we couldn't answer them because we were waiting for the 1104 to kick in, which has been around since 2012, but you waited till 2020. So you can't even do it today. But you can start creating a Christmas list of who you want to attack and say, where's my 5 year? January 1, say, I need my 5 year, right? And then they say, oh, I already gave one. To the housing. So we're gonna take a look at that. So here's the codes. The International Fire Code is 2012. And that's and then are you aware of the Life Safety Code, NFPA? If you ever have to reference NFPA, It's been around since 1927. 101.7.2. The authority having jurisdiction shall be permitted to approve any existing fire escape stair that has been shown by load test or other evidence of strength. Load test, has anybody ever witnessed a load test? On a fire escape? Do you load test your ladders on your truck? If you hit a tree with your ladders, you load test your ladders. Right? Well, these fire escapes for 100 years have never been load tested. What's other evidence of strength? That's if you fully refurbish, right, the fire escape, it needs no load test. It says clearly on the NFPA. If you fully refurbish one of your ladders, right, do you need to load test it after you fully refurbish it? A lot of times when something's brand new, is it load tested after it's brand new? When it's first brand new, you guys do load testing on brand new stuff? It's usually the cycle. Here's a brand new truck or a brand new ladder, 5 years later or 1 year later. I don't know what your sequence is for looking at trucks, but once you get something brand new, so refurbishment is the other evidence. So if you change all the bolts on a fire escape, do I need to load test it? No. So is there a cost savings for the client? If they if they invest into fully refurbishing the fire escape, is there a load test still on top of that? So, and it clearly, the law's on their side. And then you got the building code, who's held it for 100 years, and their rule is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Get to the fire escape correctly. There's obstructions, there's a fridge in front of the window that goes to the fire escape. Is that a violation of the 1104 or the 604? 604. And your own code, you guys have your own codes of obstructions too, right? But you're really saying, hey, you're in violation of not only our fire code, but the housing code too, the 604. So you guys cherry picked the best part, which is the egress system just got picked out of this by this adoption as of January 1, 2020. Got it? So far so good? This is the front of the hotel, which is was going to be opening up in 3 or 4 weeks. And I went and looked at the back one. So the 1 year that you've been receiving, they all suspect in your mind's eye right now? Who's been holding on to it? Housing. Have they shared this information with you? So you have these 1 years that have been considered 5 years. And so what happens right now is you have to make a determination how we're going to attack this as quickly as possible, because January 1 is going to be right here, and what you're going to ask for, you can send it out several ways. You can send it out with the tax records, believe it or not. You can put a declaration in the tax, a standard, so when the city sends out a tax envelope, you stick on a sheet from the fire department, effective January 1, 2020, all fire escapes must have a 5-year certificate signed by a structural engineer or others, design professional, others acceptable to the building official. So most people are gonna say, and we'd like to get a copy now for the fire department. So you guys gonna have to record keep this now, or are you gonna let housing still hold it? Housing holds what number? 604s. Do you want a copy of a 604, or do you want a certificate? And there's gonna be a separate sheet all by itself, because housing has a sheet I'm gonna show you. So let them keep their 604, you need your certificate, so if an engineer or an architect is doing that, they're gonna sign 2 forms. They're gonna sign the 1104 document, which we're gonna make a recommendation to you what it should look like. And it has 25 standard questions there that put our feet in the court fire. So if you get hurt, and I'm an expert witness on a lot of fire escape injuries and fatalities. My first case ever was in New York City where a fireman fell through. I've won over $100 million in injury cases. And the biggest piece of the first case I ever did, that the fireman who got hurt on a fire escape not only collected for being hurt on the job, he sued the owner directly and won, because he was able to prove negligence on the owner, so that it wasn't an act, it wasn't an act of God that hurt him during a fire. The owner basically left a booby trap there that he got hurt, and he won. So he was still disabled, but he went from a settlement for, they're gonna take care of me for the rest of my life, to a chunk. Okay? just recently, my last case, and I'll cover this at the end. The last case I did, LA hired me because they were getting sued for $55 million because somebody got electrocuted on a fire escape. Because the wire was within reach. But you have to do this and get it, but they reduced it down to 20 million. But LA wrote a check for 20 million because there was a power cable too close to the fire escape. It's one of our questions. Is there any power line within 10 feet of the fire escape? You think that'll save you $20 million? It's one of the questions we're gonna ask. So whenever there's a collapse anywhere in the US or in your city, and somebody says, oh, they overloaded, you say, crap. You can put, everybody can get on a fire escape and bring out your pet elephant and it still won't go down. And there's a reason, because it's engineered to 100 pounds per square foot. On these decks, so you guys, we'll start with fire escapes, but over the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years, you're gonna start getting into balconies. A lot of balconies in San Francisco. See? How about roof decks? If you have a roof deck that is used by the entire building, you're supposed to have it tied into the fire escape. Unless it's a private deck, then you don't need a second means off of the roof deck. But if everybody can get to that roof deck, you know how many roof decks currently are still not tied into their fire escape system? You know who's gonna find that out? The 5-year inspector. It's one of the questions. Got it? So, but the lateral load test on every railing is 200 pounds lateral load. That's a force of 200 pounds in any point on the railing in every direction. And that's the, you know, I'm gonna lean my butt up and have a smoke, because where's the new vaping room now? So what's everybody outside for? It's the funniest thing, every deck in the country is empty. And all of a sudden now every deck is getting filled because why? Because everybody wants to vape. So decks are supposed to be fresh air, get out there. No, everybody's like, oh, I can't smoke in this house, or I can't smoke in this hotel room, or I can't smoke in this Airbnb, or where's everybody go? In this college, where's everybody go? Out through the window to the fire escape, and now you're gonna see a lot more collapses coming because these things have not been properly inspected. So, here's your 5-year test. This is a document that the housing is holding. And I highlighted in the red. The name of the person, hereby verified to the best of my knowledge. What's that? It's called the golden parachute. To the best of my knowledge, information, knowledge, and belief and opinion, this looks good to me today. What about tomorrow? Oh, call me tomorrow. Give me some more money, and I'll tell you tomorrow. So when somebody certifies a fire escape today, is it for the next 5 years or is it for today? So 3 years from now, if there's a collapse, what's he saying?
At the time of my inspection, it was okay.
At the time, my inspection was okay. The golden parachute, which they don't give to tenants or firemen who are about to spill blood on the floor, correct? So, inspection of such and such, all wood and metal decks. So in the 604, does it also cover wood? Cement yet? Or is it implied? Implied, okay. Balconies. Oh, just fire escapes? Or they're looking for balconies? It's been there. So all these balconies on motels, hotels, houses, if you can physically get out there and get saved by a fireman, it's called an area of refuge, which means what? It's supposed to hold my weight. So you guys got to keep it simple. Keep it on fire escapes for the first year or two, and then let what? Then bring the iceberg up above, because there's more below water than there is above. So don't confuse this, but this is going to get big over the next 3 to 5 years. In the meantime, all we care about this next year, fire escapes, wood or steel, right? That's it. Will you open up the rest of the can of worms later?